In the 21st century, an immense political battle is shaping up against big sugar and the flashy sugar food establishment. Stripped of marketing and packaging, this is sugar in the raw. 360,000 metric tons arriving to feed the sugar habit of a continent. Sugar is ground from hills of sugar beets, boiled from fields of corn, but this is the old-fashioned kind, from sugar cane. It goes through an industrial process that removes all fiber, all minerals, all the good stuff, leaving a crystalline chemical called sucrose. The average person in the Western world consumes the equivalent of 25 of these 2-kilo, 5-pound bags every year, mostly hidden in processed food and drink. The sheer quantity makes sugar a key suspect in the worldwide obesity crisis. Big Sugar denies any connection. But the companies are worried about lawsuits for the way they push sugar, marketing it even to the very young.
All over America and the world, there are companies shredding documents. I have no doubt about that. They do not want to have exposed on discovery the ways in which they deliberately formulate their products in order to attract young children.
The battle against Big Sugar in the 21st century has its roots in the 18th century, when Big Sugar was at the heart of slavery. It's the story of the first human rights movement in history. It's the story of those who imagined the first political poster and the first campaign button. Those who risked careers and sometimes lives to take on Big Sugar. Adam Hochschild, author of Bury the Chains.
The interesting thing about sugar is that the battle goes on. In the 18th century, sugar was the target of progressives because it was so intricately tied to slavery. Today, we're fighting sugar for other reasons, the obesity epidemic being perhaps the major one. The industry remains strong, it remains powerful, and it still needs to be fought.
On the 10th floor of the New York University Department of Nutrition and Food Studies works a woman who, in a sense, is a descendant of activists who fought Big Sugar in ages past. Marion Nessel is a writer, a professor, and a nutritional scientist, a provocative critic of the food industry and its power. Big Sugar attacks her as an hysterical anti-food industry fanatic. She responds with sweet reason.
I'm not saying that sugar is a poison. Sugar is fine in small quantities. Sweet things help people, eat things, it helps the medicine go down. But we're talking about absolutely ridiculous amounts of sugars. Nobody is complaining about a spoonful or two of sugar on cereal. The problem is that sugars are in everything.
Sugar in the morning, sugar in the evening, sugar at supper.
Sugars are in peanut butter, bread, yogurt, hot dogs, hot dog buns, soup, bacon, cough drops, cookies, pickles, salami, soya milk, soda pop, clamato juice, soya sauce, English muffins, Ritz crackers, ketchup, baked beans, baby food, even cigarettes. For a long time, sugar has been successful keeping itself out of the spotlight and in the food. But in comic commercials like this one for a no-sugar diet, the secret is getting out. On average, people are consuming more than their body weight in sugar every year. The jury is out on whether sugar is an addictive drug. But many are becoming aware the substance induces a drug-like dependency. And it's everywhere.
Yeah, the cafeteria, the vending machines, the soda machines. It's hard, it's easier to get yourself some sugar, a sugar rush, and to go get an apple or something when you're at school.
We've become addicted to this need for sugar in all of our food. Like, I'm starving now, but I'm gonna go get a muffin just because it'll give me like a good fix.
It's being called a toxic food environment.
I would say it's an environment that's extremely supportive of eating foods that are bad for you.
But like, if you think about it, all the products that contain sugar, they're a lot cheaper. Like, if you want to go buy a bottle of water, it's like $1.50. If you want to buy a can of soda,
It's $1.
It's $1.
The idea that Coke is priced less than water just gives the whole show away. And that has to do with enormously successful industry lobbying.
Nowhere is sugar disguised more effectively than in the kingdom of carbonated sugar beverages. Dr. Joe Schwartz is the director of the Institute for Science and Society at McGill University.
I talk with people who kind of search their soul over how much sugar they should put into their coffee or their tea, whether it should be 1 spoonful or 1.5. Well, the fact is that in something like this, you can have 12 to 15 spoonfuls of sugar, but it's hidden sugar, you don't see it. That's a lot of calories. But the size just keeps increasing. And pretty soon, this will be the single serving of soft drinks. And if you don't want to drink it, you can always go swimming in it.
Again, an ad exaggerates for effect, but the facts about sugars in soda pop are astounding.
You know, if you thought for a minute about the amount of sugars that are in soft drinks, you would realize they're desserts, or as Center for Science and the Public Interest calls them, liquid candy.
Scientific studies are documenting a rising consumption of sugar drinks around the world.
The consumption of soft drinks in North America since 1950 has increased by 500%.
At school, I drink a ton of Coke.
More than 50% of teenagers consume at least 1 soft drink a day.
Maybe 3 of the bottles, 700 milliliters a day.
And many, especially boys, consume 3 or more soft drinks a day.
3 to 5 a day.
So we are awash in this stuff.
I like to teach the world to sing.
The worldwide marketing of sugar water to the young has unforeseen repercussions.
The soda companies have managed to install themselves as popular icons. Nobody ever thinks about the nutritional implications of that, or at least they didn't used to. Part of why the sugar associations are so upset now is that people are starting to think about these things.
The battle against big sugar gathering momentum in the 21st century has deep roots. In the 18th century, with sugar at the heart of slavery, radical and sometimes astonishing tactics were dreamed up to take on the empire of sugar. Dreamed up by some remarkable figures. The story of those dreamers and how they defeated big sugar begins at Cambridge University with Thomas Clarkson's ambition. In 1785, Clarkson was a divinity student determined to win a Latin essay championship. The topic happened to be sugar slavery.
I had only the wish of obtaining literary honor.
Clarkson immersed himself in the subject. The horrors of slavery began to possess him.
In the daytime, I am uneasy. In the night, I have little rest. I always sleep with a candle in the room that I might rise out of bed and put down thoughts as might occur to me, conceiving that no arguments must be lost in so great a cause.
Clarkson won the prize, and in the aftermath, had an epiphany.
He started thinking that if what he had written in this essay were true, then some person should see these calamities to their end, meaning bring an end to slavery in the British Empire.
And so a great movement is born. Clarkson forges a lifelong alliance with the religious Quaker movement. They long had been seeking a mainstream figure to spearhead the fight against slavery. Clarkson becomes the man. In Geneva, at the headquarters of the UN's World Health Organization, delegates are facing an unexpected crisis: the obesity epidemic. For the first time in human history, there are more fat and obese people in the world than hungry people. Dr. Derek Yock is a key strategist for the World Health Organization.
We used to say there were only two large epidemics that we had to deal with worldwide: the epidemic of HIV/AIDS and the epidemic of tobacco. But we really have currently got three big epidemics underway. Obesity has really come out of the shadows far faster than anybody expected.
The evidence that sugar is playing a starring role in the epidemic is a sensitive and controversial issue. The sugar industry says there is no scientific proof that too much sugar makes people fat. University of Toronto nutritionist Dr. Harvey Anderson is a scientific advisor to the sugar food industry.
The evidence hasn't proven sugar guilty in that kind of global, magic bullet kind of approach that people would like to take. The origins of obesity, the origins of disease are much more complex.
At the UN, Dr. Carrie Norum listens carefully to Big Sugar's arguments. Formerly Dean of Medicine and President of the University of Oslo, Dr. Norum chairs a team of the world's top nutritionists, alarmed at what they see.
With the marketing of these drinks has taken the population, it is fantastic increase in sugar consumption due to this. And that has revealed the problem. Whole populations are overeating sugar.
The dangers of sugar? Harvard Medical School tracked the pop consumption of 548 kids for 19 months. The results of this and other studies are shocking. The sugars in 1 can a day were enough to add more than 4 kilos, 10 pounds of body weight a year. More than 1 can increased the chance of obesity by 60%.
It's suggestive, but it's certainly not proof of cause and effect.
A scientist at the Toronto Hospital for Sick Children is looking for cause and effect. Dr. Khosrow Adeli sees a disturbing trend.
We have been noticing a significant increase in the number of kids presenting with obesity and type 2 diabetes.
They focus on fructose as a suspect. It's the main sugar in high fructose corn syrup. A multitude of these products are sweetened by this super sugar, especially soda pop. Syrian golden hamsters, with a metabolism similar to humans, are fed a diet high in fructose. They fatten within 2 weeks. Humans react the same way. Fructose seems to make you fat whether or not you exercise. In fact, the more fructose you consume, the hungrier you seem to get. McGill's Dr. Schwartz.
It actually increases the tendency to eat more food at a subsequent meal.
An overload of fructose, say a couple of cans of pop a day, can set off a slow-motion chain reaction in the body, with a terrible result.
Our conclusion is that clearly fructose is a major contributor to the current epidemic of obesity and early onset type 2 diabetes.
At the UN, Dr. Derek Yock.
People think of obesity as a cosmetic issue still. And so we see a lot more people getting fatter around us, and it's going to be awkward when you're sitting on airplanes and clothing sizes are going up. We're seeing the impact in terms of type 2 diabetes. Diabetes that I learned as a medical school was called maturity onset diabetes. It's now having its onset in late teens and 20s and 30s. And the consequences are that people lose their limbs early, they go blind early, they lose their kidneys, they get cardiovascular disease.
Worldwide, diabetes now kills 3.2 million people a year. 8,700 a day, 6 people every minute. Goliath casket, on the net at oversizedcasket.com. Supersized coffins for the supersized dead. Along with more cancer and more heart attacks, death by diabetes is a major consequence of a new kind of sugar slavery, the obesity epidemic. In the 18th century, starting his campaign against Big Sugar, Clarkson is up against not so much a mighty brand as an entire empire, with sugar at its heart. The anthem Rule Britannia pledged Britons never would be slaves. But nobody gave a second thought to enslaving Africans, the people thought to have no souls.
Men from England bought and sold me, paid my price in paltry gold.
A freed slave named Olida Akiano wrote a book documenting slavery's horrors. It gave slavery a human face. His readings became one of the first book tours in history, one of many firsts for the anti-slavery movement.
We have here an illustration of a slave ship.
Almost any political organizing technique that we use in democratic countries today was really invented or perfected by British anti-slavery activists between 1787 and 1792. The political poster. And we have all seen this image, a top-down diagrammatic view of slaves packed like sardines into a slave ship. This was devised in 1789. They rapidly turned it into a poster and put it up in pubs all over England.
Ordinary Britons began debating sugar slavery and signing petitions in protest.
The planters were, of course, appalled when the movement began. So you can see some of this through the eyes of the principal lobbyist for the planters of Jamaica in London, who was a man named Stephen Fuller.
What is this? People signing petitions to Parliament by the thousands about something not affecting the petitioners themselves.
He was really seeing something new in human history, because this was the first time that large numbers of people got agitated over something that was happening to other people on the other side of an ocean.
On the other side of an ocean, in another time, a small battle against Big Sugar takes shape. In the tradition of those who fought Big Sugar centuries ago, Nicholas Dodds decided one day that a line had been crossed. He's a student at a York Regional School in Aurora, Ontario. At first, it wasn't a health issue. It was the cola commercialization of the schools.
They're selling the students' attention spans to, these large corporations. How many vending machines do we have in our school? Something like 5 or 6. What if I just don't want to, have my mental space, interrupted by their advertising garbage all day?
Nicholas enlisted the help of his father, Jack, who was immediately intrigued.
There ought to be at least one little comfort zone where we don't have to constantly be on our guard against all these commercial messages.
What was the deal with Pepsi? The school board admitted in an email there was a contract. Nicholas asks for a copy.
So about 30 days later, we get back a letter saying, "Dear Mr. Nicholas Dodds, there is no such contract between the York Region School Board and Pepsi Bottling Company. Please go away now." And, we had an email from the school board saying, hey, there's a contract.
The Dodds petitioned Ontario's privacy commissioner to force the school board to disclose the Pepsi contract, as well as another huge Ontario school board contract with Coke. On campuses at every level, Coke and Pepsi are in a war to brand students as young as possible. Jack Dodds is worried about the health implications.
thing that I find shocking is that the people who are running the schools don't want to know about this.
The more pop sold, the more the schools get. Dr. Marion Nessel.
And so you have this situation that puts the schools in the position of pushing soft drinks. The principal is a pusher of soft drinks. If you substituted the word cigarettes for that, you would understand what the implications of that are.
The Dodds are battling big sugar companies sensitive about their brand. 200 years ago, the anti-slavery movement was the first to put big sugar on the defensive. To put a positive spin on sugar slavery, the West Indian planters came up with what they thought was a winning campaign. They financed a play.
The Benevolent Planters. Two Negro lovers are cruelly separated in Africa. They end up living side by side on plantations in Barbados. The kindly plantation owners reunite the lovers. It opens at the Theatre Royal in Haymarket in a fortnight.
Clarkson and the movement countered with a pioneering piece of public relations designed by Josiah Wedgwood.
He proposed it as a seal for letters, but also as a cameo to be worn as a brooch.
The campaign button, which you wear promoting a political candidate today, the anti-slavery movement had one, and it was, so far as we know, the first widely reproduced logo that was explicitly designed for a political cause.
The Dodds don't need a logo once the media catches wind of their campaign against big sugar.
The three major Toronto papers, once they
picked up on
the 13-year-old grade 7 student, grade 8 student angle, they went nuts. They just loved that.
One day there's a commotion at school. A decision has come down.
Unbeknownst to me, during the day, there had been, like satellite trucks pulling up in front of the school and, people swarming the office and calling the office and, just terribly bogging them down saying, oh, can we have an interview with, the Pepsi kid?
In the aftermath, Ontario bans soda pop machines in elementary schools. The Dodds can take a lot of credit for a battle won, but not the war. Coke and Pepsi are still firmly ensconced in Ontario high schools, selling water and craftily named fruit drinks, which are just as sugar-saturated as pop. Many of the tactics of modern corporate strategy were actually developed by Big Sugar to fight the anti-slavery movement. Sugar planters tried rebranding.
Let the Negroes be called assistant planters.
Very good point.
It didn't work, especially when word got out about planter justice. In Barbados, 4 sugar slaves are accused of murdering a white man.
And it was a murder which most people in the island, black and white, felt that these slaves had not committed, but they were being set up so that the real murderer, a white man, could go free.
One by one, they are executed by being burned alive. Horror is committed to put spoonfuls of sugar in cups of English tea. The anti-slavery movement began getting the message across. For those on the front lines of the obesity crisis, the enemy is inside the gates.
Would the orderly on duty please come to reception?
The Toronto Sick Kids Hospital. They sold the exclusive rights to sick children and their parents to a consortium of fast food companies, including, for a bargain basement $20,000, exclusive pouring rights to Coca-Cola. Everywhere, children are targeted as never before, and it works. Kids are now drinking twice as much soda pop as milk, a total reversal in only 20 years. The result of ruthless marketing, on TV and off.
There's so much soft drink consumed by American children that the Department of Agriculture has statistics on soft drink consumption by children under the age of 2.
Around the world, 18 million children under the age of 5 are overweight. In Canada and the United States, the number of overweight teenagers has tripled since 1980. It's now 1 in 5. Celebrities have long been a key part of Big Sugar's push to reach the young. Hockey star Wayne Gretzky used to wear Coke's colors, and before that, 7-Up. But now he's a Pepsi guy.
Of course they would want Wayne Gretzky, because if Wayne Gretzky drinks Pepsi-Cola, it must be great.
Basically, Pepsi is selling sugar water to kids, and Wayne Gretzky is helping them do it.
Well, you know what? I'm a parent, and I have 12-year-old kids, and I have a 14-year-old kid, and I have a 4-year-old son, and I'm no different than any other parent. You have to monitor what your kids eat, what they drink. Everything in life is moderation. But each parent has to be a parent and understand that that's a responsibility for a parent.
But now kids are basically drinking twice as much soda pop as they are milk, and it's having an enormous impact on their weight, on their teeth.
Absolutely, and you got to be careful of that. You know, in this life, you only get one opportunity. It's not a dress rehearsal, but at the end of the day, Pepsi does a lot of great things for communities and minor hockey and minor sports all across this country.
But the sugar in Pepsi seems to relate directly to the growing wave of obesity.
Thank you very much.
You know, they must have paid him a lot of money to do that. I wish he hadn't done it.
In the Caribbean, descendants of sugar slaves celebrate the anti-slavery movement. Historian Marcia Burrows says one campaign caught the imagination of the empire.
One of the campaign measures was to make the average British person feel that every time they took sugar, they were drinking blood. That sugar is equated to the blood of the slaves. So that it took so many ounces of blood to produce this. Why are you buying sugar from the West Indies?
Losing the battle for public opinion, the plantation owners call on science for help.
Sugar is not a luxury, but a necessary of life.
Very good point.
And a great injury have many persons done to their constitutions by totally abstaining from it.
And there was one crackpot physician, Dr. Frederick Slayer, who advocated using sugar for cleaning teeth. And I'm not sure that even the sugar industry would do that today.
At the UN's World Health Organization, known as the WHO, nations gather for a summit to finalize a global strategy to deal with the obesity crisis. To satisfy competing interests, the UN wants to make sure they have the science right. A panel of the world's top nutritionists, led by Dr. Carrie Norum, is asked to recommend a safe level of sugar in the diet. This commercial for a no-sugar diet spoofs the sugar industry report that 25% of your food can be safely sugar. At the UN, the Norum Task Force recommends that a diet should be no more than 10% sugar, the equivalent of the sugars in a single can of soda pop.
We see the statistics from many countries now that young people have about 20% of the energy from sugar. And most of that comes from sweetened sodas. Then we have to cry out to see this is dangerous in the long run.
The Norum Task Force report is called 916. To make the 10% sugar level work, it recommends that Big Sugar not be allowed to target children with ads like this. The sugar industry responds by attacking the science. At the UN, Big Sugar is represented by this rep from the sugar food industry and this delegate from the sugar water industry. They duck interviews, but Big Sugar's strong views are available online.
They say your report was junk science, it's not proven, pop science myth from public health zealots. There's the notion that the sugar in soda causes obesity. The mass media and public health control freaks build their case on sensationalistic quicksand.
Well, they are shooting themselves in the foot by saying this because this is ridiculous. People knowing about connection between diet and health know that types of citation is completely wrong and is false lobbying and false. So I'm astonished that a serious industry can use arguments like that.
Dr. Norum has no idea the trouble he is stirring up. His nemesis is this polite, 35-year-old envoy from the Bush administration, William Steiger. The U.S. position on Norum's 916 report is the same as Big Sugar's.
We criticize 916 in part because some of the conclusions were not in the opinion of the top scientists on nutrition and genetics in the United States, didn't reflect the best science available.
That's not my opinion. I have a very good connection with the best United States scientists on this topic, and they fully endorse it. So it's, if you are picking scientists paid by the industry, you get the answer you want to.
The sugar industry's Dr. Anderson dismisses Norum's UN report.
They can have their opinions. I'm just telling you my belief is that the U.S. has produced a science-based report.
Whenever I hear the word science-based, and I'm a scientist, my PhD is in molecular biology. Whenever I hear the word science-based, I know that self-interest is at work. They're not really talking about science. Because if you're really talking about science, you say the science is incomplete and uncertain, but it points in a direction. We have plenty of evidence that kids who drink soft drinks are fatter. That's all. What more do you need?
The U.S. administers the coup de grace. Unless the 10% recommendation on sugar is removed, the U.S. threatens to remove its $300 million in funding to the WHO.
They're worried that if people start doing something about obesity, they'll eat less sugar, and that will be very bad for business.
The Bush administration and Big Sugar send the scientists packing.
We consider that the revised text offers a very balanced compromise between the...
A motherhood resolution is prepared. All references to the dangers of too much sugar are dropped. In the aftermath, Big Sugar takes radical steps to ensure that the World Health Organization will not act again anytime soon. Dr. Derek Yock, a key architect of the UN strategy on obesity, is demoted and reassigned. Marion Nessel says the industry always plays hardball.
In the late 1970s, when there was an effort made to try to curb food marketing to children, the people who tried to curb it got their heads cut off and handed to them on a platter. I mean, they were just destroyed in the process. Everybody lost jobs. It was really a disaster. And nobody has dared to try it since.
Campaigning against Big Sugar has always been perilous. In 1787, Clarkson was going to get slave ship captains prosecuted for murder. They decided to get rid of him.
It instantly struck me that they had a design to throw me over the pierhead. There was not a moment to lose. I darted forward. One of them, against whom I pushed myself, fell down, and I escaped. Not without blows, amidst their imprecations and abuse.
Big Sugar has played a tremendous, I can say, bad guy role. And of course they are very influential in lots of countries, especially in the United States, where the sugar is high politics.
Florida, where Big Sugar's power has caught Hollywood's eye. There's a movie in the works, inspired by a Palm Beach family of controversial sugar barons. Jose Pepe Fanjul is one of the famous Fanjuls, the powerful Cuban exile family that owns a sugar empire worth almost $1 billion. The Fanjuls are famed for their donations to Republican and Democratic politicians. In return, they receive generous servings of public money in the form of price supports for the family sugar business. It's called welfare for the well-off. Big Sugar's access to power is legendary, but the Bush administration's William Steiger says their influence is not what it was.
I don't know who Big Sugar is, but sugar as a crop is far less important at our time than it was 100 years ago or 500 years ago.
I suspect the Fanjul brothers would be upset with you to hear you say that sugar is no longer important. It seems to play an enormous importance in American political life, contributing substantial funds to presidential campaigns and members of Congress to maintain these extraordinary price supports.
I think you could find representatives from any industry, from any agricultural commodity that have contributed in our free and open political system. It's their right to do so.
There's one more question for Mr. Steiger, prompted by a rumor he has a powerful godfather.
Are you really the first President Bush's godson?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
For those who dared to fight Big Sugar long ago, it ended this way, with a coffin at a chapel in the Caribbean. It was a funeral for slavery, held before the dawn of the first day of August, 1838, the day enslavement finally was ended in the British Empire.
On the stroke of midnight, slaves placed in a coffin a whip, an iron punishment collar, and some slave chains, took it outside and buried it in the churchyard.
At the service, there's a portrait of Thomas Clarkson, an old man now, but much honored for a long twilight struggle that had begun at Cambridge University 61 years before. In the 21st century, a different kind of slavery is being fought. There are 1 billion overweight people on the planet, 300 million of them clinically obese. And in every country, for the most part, they are an underclass. The Big Sugar diet is all they can afford. It enslaves them. To free them, says Marion Messel, Big Sugar must be prosecuted like big tobacco.
It's the only thing that will work. They have extraordinary access to the highest levels of government. They attack the science. They argue in all of the ways that tobacco companies argued that tobacco was a perfectly okay product, and they argue personal responsibility in the same way. They behave like big tobacco. They need to be treated like big tobacco.
In the end, though, the most disturbing dimension of the Big Sugar story is slavery, in the old sense of the word. It survives on plantations across the Dominican Republic, where 650,000 Haitians toil in a sugar industry dominated by 3 big companies. They are a people in torment. Families desperately trying to survive. On the $2 US a man is paid for cutting a ton of sugarcane. At the company store, the underpaid workers are cheated out of even that meager wage. As a result, most of the men head off for 12 hours of cutting cane, having not eaten. They are hungry all day.
De hombre que está trabajando como hambre, comprar la cosa ajena no puede pagarla. La gente está mala para mí, para todo el mundo.
¿Cuándo fue que ella murió?
Thomas Clarkson would have loved Father Christopher Hartley.
En el cielo no se pica caña. Vámonos caminando.
The worker's wife, the mother of his 8 children, died 3 hours ago, killed by poverty and oppression on a plantation owned by the Dominican government. The priest has been here for 8 years, agitating to end slavery. Today he's visiting workers on a 240,000-acre estate owned by Florida's Fanjul family. Here, 90,000 souls live in 183 shantytowns on the plantation. The priest says the story of one cane worker illustrates the company's indifference to the plight of its workers. Eugenio Martinez was blinded when an ox cart tire exploded. He was awarded a pension so paltry he had to go back to the fields.
Sí, ciego, estuve picando caña 10 años después que ensegué para mantener mis hijos, porque no quiero que hicieran lo mal hecho.
Father Hartley says the men who own these plantations have a lot to answer for. Florida's Jose Pepe Fanjul owns the biggest, Central Romana.
How would you respond to those who hold the opinion that you are running a plantation that harks back to the days of slavery?
I will ask them, why are they writing that? If you go to Central Romana, if anybody has gone there, you'll see that a couple of years ago we got the prize of the most progressive company in Latin America.
Father Hartley says he'd like to give Mr. Fanjul a tour of his own property.
The only excuse that I could find for him, and his only argument, I hope, that he could invoke his ignorance. The fact that he did not know in what living conditions his workers had helped him amass the fortune and the company that he claims to be so proud of.
In a shantytown owned by a Dominican corporation, a baby dies from the shocking conditions that prevail on sugar plantations across the country. On his eye is a coin to pay the boatman to ferry him across the river of death. Father Hartley conducted the funeral.
The Dominican Republic, when it was discovered by Christopher Columbus, he truly thought that he had discovered the land of paradise described in the first book of the Bible. For many tourists today, in the winter season, it is a kind of paradise. These people live, born, and die in this same paradise, but they live in it as slaves.
Once the empire of sugar was defeated by a campaign dramatizing the dreadful connections between sugar and slavery. Sugar slavery is back, more powerful than ever. Now sugar is not only devastating for those who harvest it, but deadly for those who consume too much. The world freed itself of sugar slavery once. The moment has come again. The sheer quantity makes sugar a key suspect in the worldwide obesity crisis. Big Sugar denies any connection. But the companies are worried about lawsuits for the way they push sugar, marketing it even to the very young.
all over America and the world. There are companies shredding documents. I have no doubt about that. They do not want to have exposed on discovery the ways in which they deliberately formulate their products in order to attract young children.
The battle against Big Sugar in the 21st century has its roots in the 18th century, when Big Sugar was at the heart of slavery. It's the story of the first human rights movement in history. It's the story of those who imagined the first political poster and the first camp. For a long time, sugar has been successful keeping itself out of the spotlight and in the food. But in comic commercials like this one for a no-sugar diet, the secret is getting out. On average, people are consuming more than their body weight in sugar every year. The jury is out on whether sugar is an addictive drug. But many are becoming aware the substance induces a drug-like dependency. And it's everywhere.
Yeah, the cafeteria, the vending machines, the soda machines. It's hard, like it's easier to get yourself some sugar, a sugar rush, than to go get an apple or something when you're at school.
We've become addicted to this need for sugar in all of our food. Like, I'm starving now, but I'm gonna go get a muffin just because it'll give me like a good fix.
It's being called a toxic food environment.
I would say it's a
pain button. Those who risk careers and sometimes lives to take on Big Sugar. Adam Hochschild, author of Bury the Chains.
The interesting thing about sugar is that the battle goes on. In the 18th century, sugar was the target of progressives because it was so intricately tied to slavery. Today, we're fighting sugar for other reasons, the obesity epidemic being perhaps the major one. The industry remains strong, it remains powerful, and it still needs to be fought.
On the 10th floor of the New York University Department of Nutrition and Food Studies works a woman who, in a sense, is a descendant of activists who fought Big Sugar in ages past. Marion Nessel is a writer, a professor, and a nutritional scientist, a provocative critic of the food industry and its... In the 21st century, an immense political battle is shaping up against Big Sugar and the flashy sugar food establishment. Stripped of marketing and packaging, this is sugar in the raw. 360,000 metric tons arriving to feed the sugar habit of a continent. Sugar is ground from hills of sugar beets, boiled from fields of corn, but this is the old-fashioned kind, from sugarcane. It goes through an industrial process that removes all fiber, all minerals, all the good stuff, leaving a crystalline chemical called sucrose. The average person in the Western world consumes the equivalent of 25 of these 2-kilo, 5-pound bags every year, mostly hidden in processed food and drink. It's power. Big Sugar attacks her as an hysterical anti-food industry fanatic. She responds with sweet reason.
I'm not saying that sugar is a poison. Sugar is fine in small quantities. Sweet things help people, eat things, it helps the medicine go down. But we're talking about absolutely ridiculous amounts of sugars. Nobody is complaining about a spoonful or two of sugar on cereal. The problem is that sugars are in everything.
Sugar in the morning, sugar in the evening, sugar and supper.
Sugars are in peanut butter, bread, yogurt, hot dogs, hot dog buns, soup, bacon, cough drops, cookies, pickles, salami, soya milk, soda pop, clamato juice, soya sauce, English muffins, Ritz crackers, ketchup, baked beans, baby food, even cigarettes.